Dr. Felix Corbin hadn't planned on running an intergalactic trading hub out of his garage, but plans had never been his strong suit. He was a scientist first, a businessman second, if that. His true passion lay in experimental physics and back on Earth that had meant scraping by with university grants, corporate oversight, and the ever-present threat of budget cuts. That had all changed the day he'd cracked the principles of quantum tunneling, an achievement that should have been heralded as a revolution in transportation, defense, and energy production. Instead, it had nearly gotten him killed. The moment the formula was complete, Earth's power brokers descended on him like vultures. Governments wanted control, corporations wanted exclusivity, and shadowy organizations that didn't officially exist wanted him to disappear. He had made the mistake of thinking knowledge belonged to the world. Earth's rulers disagreed. So, he left. Felix had never particularly cared for Earth. Too many rules, too much bureaucracy, too many people telling him what he couldn't do. So, when he was given an ultimatum, sell his research to the highest bidder or suffer an accident, he opted for a third option. He built a rudimentary gate, stepped through, and never looked back. Now, for years later, he stood in the middle of his garage-turned interstellar way station on a planet called Vasek for a dusty little rock on the fringes of the galactic trade network. The air was breathable, the gravity comfortable, and most importantly, it was light years away from Earth's politics. It had taken months to modify his quantum tunneling tech into something useful, but when he finally stabilized a translocation field large enough to move objects, and more importantly, cargo, he had stumbled upon something truly valuable. Interstellar trade wasn't impossible in the wider galaxy, but it was slow. Ships still relied on old warp corridors, which required weeks or even months to cross between star systems. Felix's technology, however, could create stable portals in an instant. With the right setup, he could move goods between planets faster than anyone else in the known universe. That was how the garage became a hub. It had started with small-time traders. Word spread. Now, he had a waiting list. The garage itself was little more than a repurposed warehouse, its metallic walls lined with shelves of diagnostic equipment, jury-rigged computers, and half-assembled tech scavenged from abandoned starships. In one corner, a battered old kiosk managed transactions. A makeshift lounge area housed traders who were waiting for their turn to transport cargo through his portals. The heart of it all, however, was the massive quantum stabilizer in the center of the room. The stabilizer hummed softly, flickering with energy as Felix adjusted its settings. Across from him, a towering alien with mottled gray skin and 6 gleaming eyes watched him patiently. "You are certain this will work, human?" The creature rumbled in a thick accent. It was a Rolvani merchant named Ozek, a regular customer who specialized in rare minerals. "Worked the last 17 times, didn't it?" Felix muttered, fine-tuning the controls. "Yes, but I do not trust things that seem too good." Felix smirked. "That's why I do the science and you do the selling. Stand back." The stabilizer flared, and with a crackling pop, a shimmering blue vortex snapped into existence. On the other side of the portal, a dusty mining outpost on the opposite side of the sector came into view. Ozek grunted in approval, motioning to his cargo crew. A pair of stout, four-armed loaders carried a crate through the portal, vanishing instantly. A moment later, Felix's monitor confirmed the delivery had been successful. The Rolvani merchant chuckled. "Ha! You truly are wasted as a mere scientist, human. You could rule a trade empire with this." Felix rolled his eyes. "Yeah, because that's exactly what I want. More responsibility." Ozek waved a dismissive hand, but his expression darkened. "You should be careful, Corbin. This technology is dangerous. You think only traders have noticed you?" Felix hesitated. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Ozek said, lowering his voice. "There are those who would prefer you did not exist. Competition does not sit well with powerful interests." Felix frowned, the old paranoia creeping back. He had been careful. He had taken precautions. But Ozek wasn't the type to spread rumors for no reason. Before he could respond, the console in front of him beeped. Incoming transmission. Felix tapped the screen, but instead of the usual trade request, a warning flashed across his interface. Unauthorized surveillance detected. trace originating from Outsystem. Someone was watching. Felix's stomach clenched. It seemed Earth hadn't forgotten about him after all. Felix's fingers hovered over the console as the warning blinked in angry red text. Surveillance? Outsystem? That could only mean one thing. Someone powerful had finally caught wind of what he was doing. For a moment, he considered shutting everything down. He could dismantle the stabilizer, wipe the systems, and disappear into another corner of the galaxy. He'd done it before, but he was tired of running. Besides, if someone was watching, they already knew where he was. Bolting would only confirm their suspicions. He needed more information before making a move. Felix quickly accessed the network logs, tracing the surveillance signal. The system pinpointed the origin, a relay station in deep space, bouncing the transmission through several dead satellites. Clever. Whoever was watching was taking precautions, but not enough. Felix had modified his tech with quantum encryption, and after a few keystrokes, he isolated a return signal. The source wasn't from Earth. It was coming from a high-priority node in the Galactic Trade Authority Security Division. Felix swore under his breath. The GTA was the closest thing the galaxy had to an interstellar government. They regulated commerce, prevented large-scale fraud, and most importantly, did not take kindly to unlicensed technology disrupting their control. If they were sniffing around, it meant they saw him as a threat. A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Felix nearly jumped out of his skin, only to find a familiar face staring down at him. Rila Voss, his part-time business partner, full-time pain in the ass. "Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did," she said, her dark eyes narrowing. Rila was a former smuggler, now something between a logistics coordinator and Felix's unofficial security. Her connections had kept his operation from drawing too much attention, until now. Felix ran a hand through his messy hair. "Define what you think I did." Rila glanced at the flashing warning. "You pinged them back." "Gods, Felix, are you insane?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But now I know who's watching." Rila pinched the bridge of her nose. "I swear, working with you is going to get me spaced." She exhaled sharply. "Okay, best case scenario? They're just monitoring and don't want to interfere yet. Worst case?" Felix didn't need her to finish the sentence. The GTA had the authority to seize unauthorized tech. If they decided his stabilizer was illegal, they wouldn't just shut him down. They'd make an example of him. Ozek, who had been quietly listening, let out a low growl. "This is why I warned you, Corbin. When you challenge the status quo pushes back." Felix frowned. He hadn't built this place to challenge anything. He just wanted to work in peace. But now that peace was unraveling fast. The console beeped again. Incoming transmission. Felix hesitated before accepting it. The screen flickered, and a blue holographic projection appeared. An angular alien face with silver skin and cold, pupil-less eyes. "Dr. Felix Corbin," the figure said, voice smooth and calculated. "I am Inspector Valen of the Galactic Trade Authority's Compliance Division. We are aware of your unauthorized trade activities." Felix forced a smile. "I prefer innovative logistics." The inspector didn't react. "You are operating unregistered technology capable of destabilizing established trade networks. That is a violation of intergalactic commerce laws." Felix shrugged. "Funny, I don't remember signing any of those laws. You exist within the GTA's jurisdiction. That is enough." Rila leaned in. "What do you want, Valen?" The inspector steepled his fingers. "A demonstration." Felix's stomach dropped. "You will activate your stabilizer and send a shipment of our choosing to a designated location," Valen continued. "If we determine that your technology does not pose a risk to trade stability, we may be willing to negotiate the terms of your continued operation." Rila scoffed. "And if we refuse?" The inspector's expression didn't change. "Then you will be detained and your facility dismantled." Felix glanced at Rila and Ozek. This was a trap. The moment he demonstrated his stabilizer for the GTA, they'd either confiscate it or, worse, force him to work for them. But refusing wasn't an option either. Felix's mind raced. He needed an advantage, something they wouldn't expect. Then an idea hit him. He turned back to the hologram. "Fine. You want a demonstration? You'll get one." The inspector's lips curled in what might have been a smirk. "Good. A transport ship will arrive within the hour with the cargo. The hologram flickered out. Silence hung in the garage. Rila folded her arms. Tell me you have a plan. Felix grinned, though there was no humor in it. Oh, I got something better. Outside, the sky rumbled as a ship began its descent. The GTA had arrived. The moment the GTA transport ship touched down on the rocky outcrop outside the garage, Felix knew he was in trouble. The vessel was larger than he had expected, a sleek enforcement-class freighter rather than a standard cargo hauler. That alone set off alarm bells in his head. This wasn't just a trade evaluation. This was an operation. The boarding ramp extended, and a squad of armored enforcers marched out in precise formation. Their weapons remained holstered, but Felix had dealt with enough bureaucratic muscle to know they were more than ready to draw at a moment's notice. Then came Inspector Valen. His silver-skinned form glided down the ramp with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome of this encounter. He was flanked by two aides, one tapping away at a data slate, the other scanning the facility with an augmented optical sensor. Felix forced a grin. Welcome to my humble scrap pile. Valen's expression remained unreadable. Show me the stabilizer. Felix glanced at Rila, who gave him a subtle nod. Ozek was already positioned near the power relays in case things went sideways. With measured steps, Felix led them inside. The stabilizer sat in the center of the garage, its intricate lattice of modified quantum relays humming softly. It wasn't just a teleportation device. It was a revolution, a piece of technology that could collapse distance and bypass the monopolized trade lanes the GTA relied on to control the market. Felix placed a hand on the main console. So, what's the cargo? Valen nodded to his aides. One tapped on his data slate. A reinforced containment module carrying high-value crystalline alloys. It must be transferred to a designated depot in the Kalos system, 40 light-years away. Felix whistled. That's a long haul. Would take a conventional freighter weeks to get there. That is precisely what concerns us, Valen said. Felix bit back a retort and keyed in the coordinates. The stabilizer pulsed, scanning the containment module. The room hummed with electromagnetic resonance as Felix engaged the sequence. The module shimmered. A fraction of a second later, it was gone. Felix tapped the console, pulling up a confirmation signal from the Kalos system. And just like that, it's delivered. No drift, no delay. The aide checked his data slate. Confirmed. The package has arrived intact. Felix leaned against the console. See? No black holes, no quantum disasters, no destabilized markets. Valen tilted his head slightly. Perhaps. Then the alarms blared. Felix's blood turned to ice. Rila drew her sidearm, and Ozek tensed, his spines rising defensively. The enforcers snapped to attention, weapons halfway drawn. A deep, droning pulse echoed through the garage. Felix's stomach sank. That wasn't his security system. It was coming from outside. Ozek moved first, sprinting toward the entrance and peering out. His crest flared. Felix, he growled. We have a problem. Felix ran to the doorway and froze. Above them, the sky was splitting open. A rift, jagged and pulsing with unnatural energy, crackled like a wound in the fabric of space. From within, hulking metallic forms emerged, ships, but unlike any Felix had ever seen. They were sleek, predatory, and completely unmarked. Not GTA. Not any faction he recognized. Valen stiffened. Impossible. A blinding lance of energy tore through the atmosphere. It struck the GTA transport, shearing it in half before the explosion sent debris scattering across the outcrop. The enforcers barely had time to react before the invaders opened fire. Chaos erupted. Felix ducked as a blast slammed into the rock beside him. His mind raced. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever these attackers were, they had been waiting for the stabilizer to activate. They had tracked the signal. And now they were here. Rila grabbed his arm. We need to move. Felix shook off the shock and sprinted back inside. Ozek, shut down the stabilizer. If they're after it, we can't let them have it. Ozek was already at the power relays, his claws slashing through emergency overrides. Sparks flew as the stabilizer's core dimmed. Valen's composure cracked. You knew this could happen. Felix rounded on him. I had no idea, but I'm guessing you do. The inspector hesitated. That told Felix everything he needed to know. You son of a... Felix started, but another blast rocked the garage. A section of the roof collapsed, sending machinery and debris tumbling down. Felix barely managed to roll away in time. Outside, the invaders were landing. Dark armored figures disembarked, moving with terrifying precision. Who the hell were they? No markings. No insignia. Just raw efficiency and overwhelming firepower. Valen turned to his enforcers. Fall back to secondary positions. Do not let them reach the stabilizer. His men opened fire, blue plasma bolts streaking toward the approaching figures. But the invaders had energy shielding. Every shot dissipated harmlessly against them. One raised a sleek, curved weapon and returned fire. A single pulse. An entire squad of enforcers disintegrated. Felix's gut clenched. We can't fight them. Rila gritted her teeth. Then we run. Felix turned to Ozek. Garage exit? Ozek's mandibles clicked in frustration. Main bay doors blocked, but the underground service tunnel should still be clear. Felix didn't hesitate. Then that's our way out. Valen glared at him. You're not leaving this facility intact. Felix met his gaze. Then you better hope they don't get to it first. Valen's expression darkened, but he gave a curt nod. Then they ran. Behind them, the garage trembled as the invaders pushed forward. The stabilizer, even powered down, was their target. Felix could only hope they didn't reach it before he figured out how to stop them. Because if they did, this wasn't just about his garage anymore. This was about the entire galaxy. The underground tunnel reeked of oil and burnt circuits. Felix led the way, his heart pounding like an overworked reactor. The dim emergency lights flickered along the curved metal walls, casting jagged shadows. Rila was close behind him, her plasma pistol drawn, while Ozek lumbered in the rear, his massive frame barely squeezing through the maintenance passage. Valen had joined them, though reluctantly. The inspector's normally composed demeanor was gone, replaced with tight-jawed determination. The enforcers who had survived the initial assault covered the rear, though their weapons were woefully ineffective against the invaders. Felix pressed a hand to his temple, trying to process the situation. The stabilizer had been shut down, but that didn't matter anymore. The invaders had come prepared. They had known about the device, and that meant someone had tipped them off. Valen. Felix ground his teeth. He didn't have time to interrogate the inspector now, but if they survived this, there would be answers. The tunnel sloped upward. Felix skidded to a halt at the final access panel and keyed in an override. The door groaned, then hissed open, revealing the secondary hangar. It was chaos. The landing pad was littered with wreckage. GTA ships smoldered, their hulls melted from the invaders' weaponry. Enforcer bodies lay scattered, some reduced to unrecognizable remains. The invaders were still advancing, their dark armored figures moving with mechanical precision toward the main garage entrance. Felix's gut clenched. If they breached the stabilizer room, it was over. The device wasn't just a breakthrough in teleportation. It was a gateway, an open invitation to bypass every trade restriction, every border, every defensive network in the galaxy. And in the wrong hands? Felix didn't want to find out. Rilla grabbed his arm. We need a plan. Fast. Felix's mind raced. They couldn't fight these things, but they could outthink them. His eyes darted to the far side of the hangar. There it was, his emergency escape ship. An old, heavily modified blockade runner. Faster than anything else in the sector. If they could lure the invaders inside the garage, they might have a chance. Felix turned to Ozek. How much charge is left in the main reactor? The alien's mandibles clicked. Enough for a short burst. But the capacitors are overloaded. One detonation and... That's exactly what we need. Valen narrowed his eyes. You're suggesting we destroy your facility? Felix's fist clenched. I'm suggesting we make sure those bastards don't get what they came for. Rila smirked. I like it. Ozek grunted. Risky. Felix didn't have time to argue. He sprinted across the hangar, weaving between burning wreckage. Plasma blasts rained from above as the invaders spotted them. but Felix was already moving. He slid behind a stack of crates, ducking as another pulse of energy ripped through the air. He keyed into his communicator. "I need a detonation sequence on the stabilizer core. Remote trigger." Ozek's gruff voice crackled in response. "You'll have 20 seconds once it's primed." Felix exhaled. "That's all I need." Valen watched him carefully. "And how do you intend to escape?" Felix grinned. "Trust me." That was when the invaders changed tactics. Instead of advancing, they stopped. A single figure stepped forward, taller than the others, clad in reinforced plating. A leader. The figure's helmet retracted, revealing a strikingly humanoid face. Silver skin, angular features, eyes like burning coals. It spoke. "Felix Abara." Felix froze. "How the hell do you know my name?" The invader tilted its head. "We know many things. You have meddled with forces you do not comprehend." Felix narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you?" The invader smiled, but there was no warmth. "We are the Enclave, and we have come to claim what is ours." Felix's mind reeled. The Enclave. That name was familiar, buried in old research logs. A faction that had supposedly been wiped out centuries ago. A civilization that had once rivaled the GTA in power. Except they weren't gone. They were here, and they wanted the stabilizer. Felix's grip tightened on his sidearm. "Not happening." The Enclave leader sighed. "Then you will die." Felix didn't wait. He fired. The plasma bolt struck the leader dead center. It barely flinched, then it raised a hand. Felix felt a sudden, crushing force wrap around his body. His limbs locked, his breath hitched, some kind of gravitational manipulation. His feet lifted off the ground. Pain lanced through his skull as the pressure increased. "Felix!" Rila shouted, raising her weapon, only for another Enclave soldier to knock her aside. Ozek roared and charged, but the leader merely flicked its wrist. The Vortho was slammed into the ground with bone-crushing force. Felix struggled, vision dimming. "You cannot fight us," the leader said. "Surrender, and we may let your companions live." Felix gritted his teeth. His mind scrambled for options. Then he saw it. The control panel. The reactor override was right there, if he could just reach it. With the last of his strength, he activated his neural implant. The interface flared to life, linking to the garage's mainframe. One command. "Detone stabilizer core. Remote trigger engaged." The countdown began. Felix grinned through the pain. "You should have done your research." The leader frowned. Then Felix activated the command. The entire garage shuddered. A deafening explosion erupted from the stabilizer room. Fire and energy surged outward in a violent cascade, ripping through the facility. The Enclave leader's grip faltered just enough. Felix dropped. Rila grabbed him, dragging him toward the blockade runner. Ozek, battered but alive, followed, covering their retreat with suppressing fire. Felix barely managed to scramble aboard before the doors sealed shut. The ship's engines roared to life. Through the viewport, Felix saw the Enclave forces scrambling, some vaporized by the explosion, others thrown backward by the shockwave. The leader stood firm, watching as the garage collapsed in on itself. Felix punched the throttle. The ship rocketed skyward, breaking atmosphere in seconds. As they reached orbit, Felix allowed himself a breath. The garage was gone. The stabilizer was destroyed. The Enclave had been dealt a blow. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The blockade runner's engines howled as it streaked away from the burning wreckage of the garage, leaving behind a thick cloud of smoke and debris. Felix slumped against the pilot's seat, his body aching, his mind reeling. The Enclave had come prepared, far more than he had ever expected, and yet he had still managed to throw a wrench in their plans. For now, Rila's voice crackled through the cockpit's intercom. "Hull integrity is stable, but that was way too close. You good up there?" Felix forced a shaky breath. "Define good." Behind him, the ship's engines hummed as Ozek made his way into the cockpit, rubbing his bruised exoskeleton. His mandibles clicked in irritation. "We lost everything. The garage, the stabilizer, the trading hub. All gone." Felix exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Yeah, but at least I didn't get it." Ozek grunted. and yet they still live. Felix's fingers tightened around the control panel. Ozek was right. He had delayed them, but the Enclave was still out there. And now, they were hunting him. Valen appeared in the doorway, his normally composed face grim. I sent a distress signal before we left. The Galactic Trade Authority will investigate, but he hesitated. Felix, the Enclave is not an enemy the GTA is prepared to handle. This faction was supposed to be extinct. Their return changes everything. Felix turned in his seat, fixing the inspector with a sharp look. You knew something, didn't you? Valen held his gaze for a long moment before sighing. I suspected, but I didn't have proof. The stabilizer, your research, proved to be too much of a temptation. It drew them out. Felix let out a bitter laugh. So what? I was bait. Valen's expression darkened. No, but you were the one who uncovered a secret that should have stayed buried. Felix felt his blood run cold. They want more than the stabilizer, don't they? Valen nodded. They want control, over trade, over movement, over the entire galactic network. Rila crossed her arms. And if they get it? Valen's voice was grim. Then freedom dies. The cockpit fell silent. The weight of the moment settled over them like a thick cloud. Felix leaned back, staring at the stars ahead. The stabilizer had been his dream, his legacy, a way to break free from the suffocating bureaucracy of the GTA, to open trade and travel in ways no one had ever imagined. But now it had turned into a weapon, a war waiting to happen. And the worst part? He wasn't done running. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The ship's long-range sensors had picked up movement. Rila moved to the control panel, eyes narrowing. Multiple signatures. GTA enforcement cruisers inbound. Felix exhaled. At least they showed up. Valen shook his head. No, you don't understand. He gestured at the readings. They're scanning for us? Felix's stomach dropped. What? Ozek growled. We just blew up a facility and destroyed a classified piece of technology. The GTA isn't here to help. Felix ran a hand down his face. Great. Just great. Rila's fingers danced over the console. We can slip into the next trade route and disappear. But that won't solve the problem. Felix gritted his teeth. No, it won't. The Enclave was still out there. The GTA was already treating him like a fugitive. His garage, the one place in the galaxy he had carved out for himself, was nothing but a pile of smoldering wreckage. But he wasn't done. Felix tapped the NAV controls, pulling up a new destination. Ozek frowned. Where are we going? Felix met his gaze, a new fire in his eyes. Somewhere they won't expect. Rila smirked. You got a plan? Felix let out a slow, determined breath. Not yet, but I will, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, the void stretched endlessly before them, a sea of distant stars and unknown dangers. Felix sat in the pilot's seat, staring out at the vastness of space as his fingers drummed against the console. The adrenaline of their escape had faded, replaced by the cold weight of reality. His garage was gone. His research was lost. The Galactic Trade Authority saw him as a rogue scientist, and the Enclave, his true enemy, was still lurking in the shadows. And yet, despite everything, he was still here. Rila stepped into the cockpit, arms crossed. So, what now? Felix let out a slow breath. That depends. How do you feel about breaking more rules? She smirked. I'd be disappointed if we didn't. Behind them, Ozek skittered in, his exoskeleton still bruised from their escape. We have no base, no funds, and no allies. This is a terrible situation. Felix turned to face him. We have a ship. We have knowledge. And we have a problem no one else is willing to solve. Ozek's mandibles twitched. That is not a plan. Valen entered last, his usual composed demeanor cracked by a lingering tension. It might not be, but it's a start. Felix pushed away from the console and stood. The Enclave isn't going to stop. If they get their way, trade will collapse. Planets will be at their mercy, and no one will be able to move freely. If the GTA won't act, then we have to. Valen tilted his head. And how do you suggest we do that? Felix grinned. By doing what humans do best. Rila rolled her eyes. Being reckless? Felix's grin widened. Worse, innovating. The next few weeks were spent on the move. Felix and his crew traveled from system to system, gathering what little resources they could. They traded with smugglers, scouted abandoned stations, and pieced together a plan from scraps and whispers. The Enclave's influence was growing faster than they had anticipated. Entire trade routes were falling under their control, forcing independent merchants into submission. But in the midst of chaos, there was opportunity. Felix worked tirelessly, reverse engineering pieces of his stabilizer from memory. He scavenged old tech, repurposed forgotten designs, and, slowly, began to recreate the heart of his invention. Not for the GTA, not for any government, but for the people who needed it most. His garage was gone, but the dream was still alive. They operated in the fringes, setting up mobile hubs in forgotten corners of the galaxy. At first, only a few traders dared to use them. But as word spread, more came. Pilots, engineers, refugees looking for a way out. And with each new ship that passed through, Felix's new network grew. The Enclave noticed. The attack came without warning. A fleet of black ships dropped out of hyperspace, weapons hot. Felix's latest hub, a repurposed asteroid station, shook under the first barrage. Alarms blared as traders scrambled to escape, and Felix's team rushed to the command deck. Rila cursed. They found us faster than expected. Ozek growled. We have no chance in a fight. Felix clenched his jaw. Then we don't fight? He reached for the console and activated the stabilizer prototype. A low hum filled the room as energy pulsed through the station systems. The Enclave ships locked on, their weapons charging. And then in an instant, they were gone. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Simply elsewhere. The stabilizer had done its job. Felix let out a breath as the station fell silent. His invention worked, not just as a tool for trade, but as something more. A weapon against control. A way to fight without firing a shot. Valen stared at the readings in shock. You just transported an entire fleet across the system. Felix grinned. I'd say that's pretty innovative, wouldn't you? Ozek exhaled, mandibles clicking. They will come back. Felix nodded. And next time, we'll be ready. Because now, it wasn't just about trade. It wasn't just about survival. It was about freedom. And the Enclave had no idea what was coming next.